Isn't it time we stopped hating Phil Collins?
Phil Collins, for a guy who was #1 on the charts, packed stadiums and one day. They played both sides of Live Aid. He's taken more hits than anyone else. A lot of pop stars over the years, was made fun of as an odd punching bag, reviewers and snubbed by rock purists, and even made fun of by artists half his age. Several people have been against him over the years. His own, and he didn't hold back from awkward turns downs by the heroes of his youth to grunge stars who wanted him to be fired. Here are the times when Collins drew the name, and the line may surprise you. Let's dive in. Pink Floyd. I was never. Phil Collins is a big Floyd fan, but he has never pretended not to be there in talks. It's been decades since he made it. It was clear that Pink Floyd didn't do it for him, especially when they were young. Arnold and I saw them at the stage. Lane, Collins said in a 2014 letter. Talk with documentary maker John Edginton, but they didn't do it for me. He told me he was more of an early Yes fans and liked bands like Jethro Tull, but never linked to Floyd's heavy, spaced-out sound. Even as Genesis was put with other books, Floyd during the rise of prog rock, Collins turned down the movement of the 1970s. It was like I was in a band that was always put those things in the same box as them. But I never really thought we were in the same box, but it's likely that the tone is typical Collins, making fun of himself. But made it clear that Pink Floyd were the sad. Collins played drums for the Mystics. Want a song you can hum in the car? While Collins mostly kept his criticisms to himself, Roger Waters did not turn on the lights. In a 1992 interview with Musician magazine, let out one of the most brutal getting down in rock. When I try to be diplomatic, I always end up putting down poor Phil Collins. He shows signs of a lot of what something might be wrong with the music business. He may not agree, and neither may his fans. It seems to me that he's just acting to write songs or play rock and roll. It's an act, which is why it's not good enough for Waters. Collins showed everything he didn't like about her 1980s pop, slick production, chart-friendly tunes that aren't very deep emotionally. That might seem strange since Pink Floyd packed arenas and put out The Wall is one of the craziest theater performances in the history of rock. But for Waters, art was about facing the evils of society, not writing a radio hit like Studio. At its core, it wasn't just a disagreement of characters. Pink was a clash of musical ideas. Floyd was interested in making immersive sound experiences based on ideas of apathy, war, rage, and establishment decay. Phil Collins in particular, after Genesis, favored being emotionally accessible. His songs were about breakups and sadness, regret, and sometimes gorillas playing drums. Both have sold a lot of records, had a lot of fans, but one person saw the other as arrogant and dazed, while the other person told his rival off as filler for businesses. In Collins' words, I liked what Floyd said when I found it by accident, but I pay attention to what they say. This line alone says everything about the Floyd was the band you had to hear. Get ready, because Collins was the one who was on the radio whether you didn't want him or not. It's hard to we can talk about this fight without how Genesis and Pink Floyd are alike. For years Peter Gabriel's play Genesis was seen as on the same level as Floyd in Prog Desire. When Gabriel left, Collins over and led the band through shorter, more pop music. Critics screamed records sold a lot more. But Roger Waters still fell Idea Records and Political Allegory. Collins was likely seen as a traitor, a person who made prog rock into pop at the same time. Candy Collins didn't seem to. What do you think? Waters is a bit of a grump. Collins once said something not so well known. Comment on a fan forum. But Gilmore is a lovely nice guy, a great description. Collins liked the music but didn't want Floyd's bad moodiness. Took them seriously. Collins, even though he was an idealist who never thought he was good enough. Honestly, some of the stress came from Collins said something offhand about Floyd was a little dull, but he later, I may have said that, it was made clear. I thought their music was dull at the time. I don't find music that makes me move interesting. They're really dull now, but I never pay attention to what they have to say. Even though it was pretty calm, it was enough to earn. Floyd made fun of him a few times. Friends and maybe a little more anger. Both Collins and Floyd found water from put together under the same genre, prog rock, a box that didn't look like it. Completely at ease with Collins in particular pushed back hard against the as Genesis moved into pop. that he tried to get away from the land the fancy stage shows and 12-minute rooms. We didn't want to write fantasy no more stories. Collins said of the Gabriel's years at Genesis, we wanted to Floyd, let's talk about real things. Looked into their lore more, releasing songs like The Final Cut and The Division Bell never changed their minds about promise to use music as a message, but their effects were always linked to both of their irritation parties. As the years went by, the fight ended. Into the Background wasn't quite fixed, but Collins isn't working anymore. I think I've definitely become more of a not as much of a Pink Floyd fan as I was at the time, but don't get it wrong, there was never a bromance ready to happen. Didn't work together or go on tour. They didn't give up respect for each other in track lists or festival bills, Paul said. McCartney, who was once a hero, went bad. There are many diva singers in rock and roll. Fights, but the quiet strain between Phil Collins and Paul McCartney are still together. Not because it went off in the rags, but it began with one off-the-cuff joke and never really got better. Collins, like a lot of people his age, used to look up to the Beatles as a teenager. He even got a Blink and You'll Miss It when it shows up in A Hard Day's Night as a loud fan in the crowd. After years of building his own tradition with Genesis and a great career as a solo artist, Collins his own royal stages, not as a Collins was not only a fan, but also a friend by 2002. Well-known name, so when he ran into McCartney at the gala for Queen Elizabeth II Jubilee party, he went up to him having real respect and a first copy of Hunter Davies's The Beatles hoped to get a signature, but gotta say he'd never forget, "Oh Heather, our little Phil likes the Beatles a lot." McCartney allegedly told his wife at the time Collins didn't find it sweet. Putting down the kind of comment that doesn't hurt because it's mean, but because it's rude, he said later, "I thought you underscore," he told the Sunday Times. Never forgot it. What was wrong? Collins' most wasn't just a joke. It was the way of thinking behind it. He said in comments that McCartney had an insult meant to make someone feel bad. He does this thing that makes you, I know this must be hard for I am a bug, so I am not like you. Collins did not need to be praised as a hero, he only wanted respect. Many years after Collins wrote about the event in his autobiography Not Dead Yet, McCartney reached out. Collins thought the message wasn't mean. I didn't get it, but it wasn't warm either. Flower, I got more of a let's go vibe. Collins, let's get on with our lives. Enough, he thought McCartney had missed the point. Or maybe they didn't want to understand why that moment hurt so much. What makes this fight stand out even more is how Collins talked about George in different ways. Harrison, after Harrison made a mistake, didn't give him credit for all things he made up with Collins with Must Pass, a joke that was so silly it made people laugh. Collins accepted the fact that it was personal. No matter how much it cost him with McCartney, there was no laugh and no sharing moment of quiet, and a quote that's Collins has been afraid ever since. I looked up to McCartney a lot. I wish I hadn't met him. We don't have a beef built on insults or news stories. It's a quiet sadness that never went away. As a kid, who in one offhand moment showed a side of Collins looked forward to seeing They'll Never Trade diss songs or mean tweets, but in Collins that time when you signed the autograph said it all. He never really let it go. Oasis, they're really bad guys. The fight began in the Noel Gallagher was in Oasis in their early days. Was still making up his personality band with grunge music on the run after Cobain's death. Noel put Oasis in the raw working class answer to what he said it was music for junk food. Pop music and singers like Phil Collins spoke about the 2016 film. Noel made his goal crystal clear. It's clear, Phil is going to go. Collins and Sting make bad music. MCD's music we need to get in the maps and print them out. Cut off Phil Collins's head in my fridge by the end of this decade. I haven't, I'll fail even worse than before. It was clear that Oasis had released Nell had already picked Collins as a sign of everything he was against over the years. Noel only got stronger. Talks in the 1990s and 2000s, he often talked about Collins as the Antichrist and even got him to walk around. Talk about politics ahead of the 2005 UK election. Noel told The Guardian, I'm going to vote for Labour because I think it's the right thing to do. The only reason to vote Labour is if the Conservatives get in touch with Phil Collins is making threats to live here again. We don't want that, let's be honest. To Noel Collins, it meant overproduced business music and, it seems, also rich middle-aged people who are conservative. It did not matter if the political claims were true or fair, they were harsh and private. For years Collins didn't get too interested in the back and forth, but after being called in interview after interview, the Antichrist blamed for being the reason Oasis won with the Jam, he finally said, those guys are awful, he said in a TV interview. Talk to them, they're rude and not as skilled as they believe they are. Keep making fun of me, which I strange. He made it clear that he didn't hate, just their sound and how they act. If you can handle them, make good songs. How I act, I like the Beatles, and what this is a nod to something I liked. I heard the music before I knew what these guys were doing, but it had turned into more than a fight. Bizarrely famous then, there was no one saw Phil Collins and Noel Gallagher stuck in the same Caribbean bar. As Collins wrote in his book called Not Dead Yet, he was taking a trip with his wife on Mystica when he had his own island in the Caribbean. Got to know the owners of a small neighborhood business in the bar. They made fun of Collins's set. One night if they brought in a few he agreed to play music, but when he showed on stage where they were sitting at the time, the back of this little bar, Collins thought back to Arnold, his wife Johnny Depp, Kate Moss and an unknown Labour MP, which one, meant to break the ice. Collins went up to Null and asked, "Are you there?" Gallagher wanted to join in for a jam, turned him down and made a sarcastic say something about Collins's most recent try at guitar music. Collins said, I went to the bar and retired, a little ashamed. Thanks, Kate Moss, but she came over and said sorry for the strange meeting. Then as Collins began to play his set, Noel and his group of people got up and left. If you weren't sure how deep the split went, they went away on that island night. It was said that bad blood even got into the next group. In a later chat, Nell said that Collins's kids once thought Liam Gallagher was him and faced him and said, they had a go at him. "Why are you always?" Null asked. "Having a temper tantrum against our dad?" When I heard about it, I thought, I really hope someone took a video of it. No response anyway for Liam, for Phil Collins, and for everyone else. In the 2010s, Noel began to slightly soften. He said this in a chat with Zane Lowe, said they knew it was a joke about maybe because he was the Antichrist. I gave a fair look at Phil Collins that day, but the part about him looks good. Being the devil. Still, the digs didn't stop. When asked about artists, songs he liked were called In the Air Tonight, a song he said he did having fun, but also In Paradise was Fing's. He did make an offer. A comeback, and Don't Worry About the Gabrielis. Got some good. The tune took over, and I wasn't into that. Collins later talked about Noel's political views. A more direct hit by calling it a lied about it. I don't care if he told me I care if he likes my music or not. If he starts calling me a fool, because of my political views, it's just my opinion based on an old quote that was misunderstood by Collins. Was getting close at that point. Leaving his job, he had finished a last Genesis tour and said in public that he not going to go on tour or put out more music. His attention had turned to music writing about family and his whole life. The Battle of the Alamo has always interested people. Led Zeppelin's dream gig turned into fantasy in rock history. There have been some are crazy, loud, and full of drugs, some are quieter, with guitars and titles but bitterer and lasting. Like There was a bad note played at the wrong time in the fight in front of 1 million people between Led Zeppelin and Phil Collins falls into the second group. It was sprung from one of the most well-known meetings in the history of music, a show that will only happen once, should have never forgotten for all the right. This is why it turned into a both sides would spend a lot of money on decades putting the blame on each other for Live Aid. It was more than just another show. It was the show, a world event, a reason event put together by Bob Geldof to raise money to help people who are suffering from famine in Ethiopia. It brought together the big names in music from 2 different countries. Phil Collins, who is riding high as both a star and member of the band Genesis, played it before at Wembley Stadium in London, getting on the Concorde and going to Philadelphia, is going to do it all over again. This time it was Led Zeppelin, but Led Zeppelin was no longer Led Zeppelin. They had the famous drummer John Bonham. Died in 1980. The band soon broke up. After they said they couldn't keep going without him for live help reluctantly agreed to get back together for one night only. That meant they have to drums, or two in this case, Phil Collins, Tony Thompson from Chic from the things we're off to start with in his book. Collins said he thought not dead yet he would only play a few songs with James Page and Robert Plant under his own names, not as Led Zeppelin. No, the whole set list he only did one thing to get ready, hearing Stairway to Heaven on When Concord I Gets There, I Go to the Wagons. Robert says Jimmy Page is angry. Collins remembered that it wasn't an easy warning once he met Page, things almost went bad. Right away when Collins tried to show how to play the drums start to Stairway, Page laughed and said, "No, it doesn't go like that." That wasn't exactly a warm welcome. Even though Colin tried to organize, keep things simple with Thompson, the set could not be saved. Show with rock and roll music, a lot of love, and Stairway to Heaven was jumbled, slow, and painfully weird. Collins knew it right away. If I could have left during Stairway I would have, but think about the news stories. Phil Collins quits Led Zeppelin. I stayed, mimed, and played at Live Aid. Just to get through it, air drums. It was clear that things were going badly. In public, Jimmy Page didn't waste any time. Not giving Collins a chance. We had to. Not even Page told her about the hours of practice the drummer couldn't get the times rock and roll start. We were in a lot of trouble. In a different conversation, called Collins, bashing away, without an idea and grinning during the so good that even Robert Plant joined in being passive-aggressive in the shade sitting next to Collins. In an interview after the show he told MTV, "The three of us knew what we did and what everyone else did their very best," while John Collins was immediately pointed at by Paul Jones. Collins was, to put it mildly, angry. "I got angry," he later said. "Perhaps I didn't know the news as well enough for Jimmy, but I wasn't it's just that if you watch the video you can see Jimmy dribbling Robert, not trying to hit the notes, and I'm just trying." Collins felt like he was being used to get out of the way, not ready, and blamed when he wasn't about to be quiet. For most artists, even if it was just playing drums for Led Zeppelin for one night would be a dream. For Collins, it turned into one of the worst experiences he had at work. He called it a mistake and a disaster in almost all interview because he was being honest about how bad it was. Has gotten renowned being there wasn't amazing, they were not very good, I have to say. It made me feel a little. Jimmy was bothered by the dribbling. This is what Page Collins told Classic Rock magazine. "I felt like a spare part in 2016. In a strange way, Collins really liked for the first John Bonham Zeppelin song player and thought he was a big deal. In effect he even admitted that it was impossible to fill his shoes. "You ought to have left it alone, put two drummers in place of Bonham, and the Zeppelin thinks it will work." It was such a bad show at Live Aid that the band wouldn't let it be on the record. When the official Live A DVD came out, Page, Jones and Plant made sure it was left out like it didn't happen. Of course, bootlegs will always be remembered on the internet. Videos of the set are still being shared on YouTube. And it's just as painful as mistimed cues might have caused notes to be missed. Band members look at each other with confusion. Collins is definitely having a hard time, and so am everyone else. It was meant to be a moment in the history of rock. Instead, it turned into a lesson in what happens when the ego doesn't talk to the mind. And not getting ready hit each other on the largest stage in the world. Since then Collins has tried to move on, but the bitterness sometimes comes back in talks. He's talked about a act doomed from the start, not because of bad will but because of poor plans and getting lost hopes and fears. This is how things stand. Collins, Robert said to himself, "Lovely guy. Robert on the Zeppelin, something is different. The room gets dark energy. It's like he didn't say what kind of bad chemistry it was." Those words were meant for Page, but he didn't have to, and Page has said they felt bad about the meeting. He told the Sunday that it wasn't very smart. Things he's never fully said sorry for. If you throw Collins under the bus, if anything, he stepped it up. Kurt Cobain, I hate what he stands for. In the early 1990s, there was a huge change making waves in the music business. In the 1980s, leather pants and synths were wears out. Flannel shirts in anger and distortion were in. Grunge was here, and at its head was Kurt Cobain. Was a messy punk with a tough skin and a sharp tongue, dislike for anything he thought was fake or made. Corporations, including Phil Collins by when Nirvana's Nevermind came out 1991. Collins was already a big star hit with songs like In the Air, It Was Tonight and Another Day in Paradise for him. Went beyond his Genesis prog rock roots and become the face of soft rock and roll, but to Cobain, Collins didn't just play old songs, he showed what grunge was all about, rising up against. In a 1992 conversation, Cobain let free in Melody Maker what would become one of his well-known rants against another artist who is on top of the world. The sound had just changed because of Nirvana. A scene that smells like Teen Spirit, but Cobain was already disappointed with the business and ready to name names. You know what I hate about rock, he asked before letting loose with the words, I hate Phil Collins and all of that. I hate tie-dyed t-shirts because I'm a white man's soul. I also wouldn't wear a t-shirt that was tie-dyed, unless it was colored with the P of Jerry Garcia's blood and Phil Collins Garcia. It was a very high-level ball, one that was enough to hit Collins. The Grateful Dead and What They Did for Money, all the hippies in one breath, for it's not just music that Cobain Collins did. He stood for things they didn't like. Everything was fake, clean, and professional. Collins had been famous before Olympics, won Oscars, and became a well-known brand, but to Gen X stars like Cobain, he was father rock at its best. The friendly face of a business that Collins wore suits, was clean-shaven.